You're listening to Super Power Up with multidimensional master, superpower expert, and former counterintelligence agent, Tonya Dawn Recla. If you're ready to disrupt reality, then sit down, strap in, and prepare to experience the show that proves there is no spoon.
Hello, everyone. This is Tonya Dawn Recla, your superpower expert, and I'm really excited today about this show. We have with us today Claudette Rowley, who's going to help us flesh out like the power and the what the corporate organizational culture conversation can really do in your business. And I know a lot of times as entrepreneurs we get started and we're driven by what we're passionate about, and we want to do good things in the world and all this stuff. But there are some just tried and true steps of that businesses follow, that corporations had to follow even at the inception point, that allowed for that level of success. And so I really appreciate the conversations where we can kind of drill down and just get serious about the nuts and bolts and things that have to be there. And what's beautiful about the culture conversation is that it rests on some really foundational business principles, but you get to develop it however you want to, right? So there is a creative aspect to this. I think as entrepreneurs, a lot of time we resist anything that feels too stifling. But I'm going to invite you to look at developing an organizational culture from a very different lens during this conversation. So we're talking today about entrepreneur success starts with culture. And so Claudette's going to help us kind of feel into how we go about that, how we can start with it, and really what the benefits are of looking at it through that lens. So she is such an impressive resume. She's CEO of Cultural Brilliance. She's a cultural design and change management consultant. She's the author of Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of organizational excellence. But we're talking decades of a wealth of information that she brings into this dialogue. So I'm going to invite you to just take a breath, sit down, relax, listen to the conversation, and see how it fits into everything that you're creating in your business. So Claudette, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, great. Thanks so much, Tonya. So glad to be here. Excited about our conversation. Yeah.
I am too. I'm kind of a little bit of a geek when it comes to the business building process. And I love my systems and my processes and looking at what works and adaptability and mutations and everything. But at the heart of it, we always kind of come back to this culture conversation, like what do we stand for type of dialogue. But before we get too far into that, I want to know a little bit more about you. And we'll start with just asking, what are your superpowers?
What a great question. So it's a fun one, isn't it? What are your superpowers?
I think so.
Yeah. I mean, I think one of my superpowers is helping to solve complex problems, which is one of the reasons I'm so interested in culture. I've always really loved problem solving. I'm one of those people that if there's not a problem to solve, I have to be careful not to create one. It's just so energizing for me. And I really, over the course of my professional career, the complex people problems, the complex systems problems, and cultural problems are really the ones that I love to solve. And I would say that's definitely a superpower for me.
Oh, I agree completely. And it keeps me entertained. Like I like that you acknowledge that you may have a tendency to create if there isn't something to solve.
Mm-hmm.
It's beautiful that you have that level of self-awareness and can call it out. Because I do think a lot of us are driven by that, right? Like we find our little comfort zones and the things that we're good at and the things that excite us. And then, if we're not careful, that becomes this myopic kind of perspective on things. I know it's easy to do in the entrepreneur arena. So let's talk a little bit about the book, and then we'll tie it back into the entrepreneur stuff. So tell me a little bit about the how the book idea came about, and based on the years and years of experience that you have. Share a little bit with our listeners about that.
Sure. Yeah, the book is called Cultural Brilliance, the DNA of Organizational Excellence. And it came about it was recently published, actually just a couple of months ago, but the seed of inspiration was about 2.5 years ago. And it was really around my desire to have a new challenge in my career. And when I started to look back at everything that I'd done, I realized that I was always really interested in culture, and that organizational culture, corporate culture, up until 5-10 years ago, wasn't something we talked about very much, right? You really weren't supposed to talk about it. Interestingly, as an organizational development consultant, the conventional wisdom was if you talk to an organization about culture, they wouldn't hire you. So
interesting.
You would do you'd talk about communication, you talk about productivity, you talk about other things. Yeah, it was really interesting. And so I finally said, no, let's talk about the truth, right? And the truth is culture. Yeah, because one of my other superpowers is truth telling. So let's talk about the truth. So that's really how the book was born. And it ends up being a roadmap for any kind of organization, doesn't have to be a company, any kind of organization to really transform their culture, to understand, to have a step-by-step process for doing it, and to really create a culture that I call a brilliant culture. And brilliant cultures are cultures that are really using the potential. So what I noticed was that so many organizations would leave all this potential on the table in the form of their culture. They would, they could have such a better culture, and they wouldn't, maybe most likely because they didn't know that they could or how to do it. Mm-hmm. And we know how much that hurts people, how much people aren't themselves or their best selves. And productivity would be down, innovation would be down, trust would be low. There'd be all of these indicators that there were cultural issues. And what I noticed is when we resolved some of those, the company got so much more successful. And that was always, and the people were happier, right? They were more supported. They were doing better work, et cetera. So it's really a win-win to improve your culture.
Yeah, I'd imagine you and I could probably talk for days about some of the issues and the inherent kind of complex nature of a concept like culture and where we got some of that from. Prior to moving into the counter intel arena, I've been diving around the human psyche for quite a long time, and prior to that, my master's was in a field of research that really looked at kind of social identity dynamics and how we all relate to concepts like culture. And it really does wreak havoc and bleeds over into organizational structure and everything else, because we carry all of that, in our verbiage through the collective conscious. Like we have all of these really warped and kind of damaging stories around self-definition, cultural definition, group definition, like all of this stuff. So I understand why that would have been a prevalent thought. And I applaud you for kind of piercing through and saying, okay, forget this. We took a similar route with the whole superpower conversation. We were cautioned really early on not to use a word like power, especially if our main client base, and at that time it was predominantly female. Well, I did kind of like what you did. It's like, okay, well, let's instead take a look at this and see what is it about this word that really is not appealing, doesn't make people want to dive in. The rebel rousers or whatever, kind of fleshing out these concepts, because there is a wealth of knowledge and potential success embedded within all of them, I think. So you're a kindred spirit in that regard. So I appreciate that. We're going to take a quick break. Before we do, though, why don't we tell people where they can go to find out more about you?
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thanks. My website is culturalbrilliance.com, and you can find out more about me and my business and the book right on the website.
Beautiful, beautiful. We'll have links on the page also, folks. So stick with us. We're going to take a quick break. We're talking with Claudette Rowley today about entrepreneur success starts with culture. You're going to want to stick with us, because when we come back from the break, we're going to talk about how you can start to think about these things in your business, or perhaps you think you have a culture that's working for you. And I'd imagine Claudette's going to be able to give us some tips on perhaps how you can make that even more brilliant. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Are you here to change the world? Do you talk about things like vibration, frequency, awakening, and consciousness? Are you pretty sure you have superpowers? The Superpower Net is unlike normal coaching programs and conscious communities. We provide training, intuitive guidance, peer-to-peer learning, intensive one-on-one coaching, and a high vibrational network of people just like you. When you join the net, you get 24/7 access to a collaborative group of people who support you as you master your personal power and unlock your superpowers. If you're ready to use your superpowers to change the world, then join the Superpower Net today. Visit superpowerexperts.com/the-net to learn more.
Awesome. We're back. You're listening to Superpower Up Podcast. I'm Tonya Dawn Recla, and we're talking today with Claudette Rowley about entrepreneur success starts with culture. And so before the break, we were discussing kind of just how yummy this concept of culture can be when we allow ourselves to relax into it and really dig around and find out how we want to create it and what behooves the business and how we're going with it. So Claudette, what can some of the entrepreneurs and business owners who are listening, how can they look at their culture perhaps differently or with some sort of an enhancement to create this brilliance that you're speaking of?
Yeah, the first step is is really to be an observer of your culture. Whether you're doing a formal assessment of some kind, or if you're a solo practitioner of just one or two employees or contractors working with you, really observe, ask people for feedback. How would you describe our culture? What would you say it was like? Really start to get what I would call a 360 view of how your culture operates, what's great about it. Maybe there's some things that are actually holding you back. So from a business perspective, it can be incredibly helpful. If, for example, you found out, from feedback that you had a great culture in a lot of ways, but there are a couple of areas you needed to shore up, like maybe one was around timeliness or something like that. And you thought that wasn't such a big deal, but you found out that some of your customers are really frustrated by it. And you realize, oh my gosh, this is hurting my business. This part of my culture is hurting my business. I'm going to choose to change this. That would make, something like that could make a huge difference in the amount of customers you have and how satisfied they are. So really, especially if you're a solopreneur or just a very small business, really ask questions, get feedback, listen, assess, and see what you find out.
Yeah, I love that. Folks, I know you see the parallels here. Like, we talk all the time about the internal growth game being all about that inception point of observation, right? Your businesses are no different. Like, you would do well to look at your business as its own, like, living, breathing organism, right? And so all of this work that we're doing individually and internally needs to be applied to the business as well, and it will grow and evolve and develop if you let it. However, we get, just like we do in our own personal development, we get myopic in our businesses too, because I remind our team all the time, like, I haven't used our processes in that way because we're developing them. And so to get feedback from the people who are using processes, who are engaging with your business, from clients, Claudette's example about your client base, do you ever check in with your client base and just see how they navigate, what you're delivering? And I think it's so valuable when you're willing to kind of sit back and inquiry about that.
Yeah, I agree. It's a level of inquiry, and I love the connection you're drawing with our own inner individual work, right? And I often think about culture work as, you've already mentioned this, especially in a larger organization, it is raising collective consciousness, because without the change in awareness, nothing changes organizationally.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm, just for really selfish reasons, I want to pick your brain about one of the biggest challenges we see for our clients around in the emerging spaces and the scaling spaces is, they're kind of stuck in this chasm between the services and solutions that exist for a solopreneur and then the enterprise solutions that exist for corporations. That chasm seems to be kind of sparse when it comes to real solutions. And so what we advocate for is taking corporate concepts, successful corporate concepts, and translating them down to your business, because at least you know then what you're walking into if your desire is to continue to scale it and grow it. When it comes to culture, like, a lot of the corporate culture books and stuff are really designed for larger businesses. And so I know that it can be really frustrating for entrepreneurs at a certain level if they can't make that translation in their mind. How would you advise somebody if they're like, look, I know we want to go here, like, this is what we're doing, we want to, I don't know, go to an IPO or whatever the case may be, whatever the exit is, sell off the business, whatever, structured in such a way so the culture becomes part of that really valuable IP of the company. How can they kind of step into that without feeling overwhelmed by the corporate dialogue, and take the bits and pieces to get started now, after the observation phase, like in the strategy aspect?
Yeah. So, when I'm working with organizations, one of the things that my process includes is what I call a design phase. So before we get into planning, before we get particularly strategic, we do the assessment work, and then we decide based on, what you learn in the assessment, or I call it authenticity phase. You start to understand what kind of culture you need. And it actually doesn't matter the size of your organization. It could be two people, like this, all the same. The ideas apply pretty much identically. So what kind of culture you want or need to support your business, support your strategic objectives. And then you design, how you're going from point A to point B. And I think a lot of times that design piece gets skipped. So people say, okay, we need this kind of a culture. Okay, let's plan it, let's implement it, let's do it. And there's not a lot about the how piece. So it's a really important question, is how will we functionally change our culture or help it evolve, right? From how it is now to where we'd like it to be, just like we do with people, right? I want to change something inside of myself, right? How am I going to do that? How do I get from point A to point B and close that gap? So I think that is a really key idea that an entrepreneur of any size business can apply. How do we bridge the gap from A to B? How do we actually design how we're going to move forward? And when you start asking yourself that question, you'll usually find some really interesting answers that emerge. And the book has a lot of detailed, actually, ways of doing it for people who are interested in, in reading something about it first.
Yeah, read the book, folks. Like, seriously, like that. If you really do want to be successful in your business, especially if you're in a scaling or emerging space, like you have to consume the material that's in alignment with where it is that you want to go. And ignoring the culture conversation, I think it's a huge mistake. I think it's risky, from a risk aversion, risk mitigation conversation with my other hat, but also you can't do good things in the world. You can't be of service if your business isn't successful. Right. If that's your modality, right? Like, I'm not suggesting business is the only way to do that, but if you're listening to this conversation, obviously you're intrigued at the very least. So understand that it is all part of the bigger dialogue, and there are components of business. It's it's kind of the chop wood, carry water phase. Like you gotta attend to it, just like you gotta pay taxes. On the business, there are other processes that you would do well to institutionalize. And I like what you said, Claudette, about it doesn't matter if it's two people. It really doesn't. And I think sometimes we get caught up, even as I framed the question, I got caught up in the sense of like, well, maybe this isn't pertinent for this level, but I think it's a really great reminder. Yeah. Well, and entrepreneurs, like we usually like eat, breathe, and sleep our businesses. So it's like you're going to be that intimate with something. You might as well kind of attend to the details of it.
Oh, right. And think about how you really would like as we do as entrepreneurs. How do I really want this business to work? How do I want it to be so that I love it and it's successful, right? That both of those are in place.
So I have a little bit of a bias that says that nowadays, like while there are some tried and true things about business that I keep alluding to, for the most part, we can really we're living in an exciting time where we can structure businesses in lots of unique ways. Like we have both of our businesses are hybrid business models, and we had a lot of fun putting those models together, like kind of picking and choosing and pulling. Like I really think that we're in a unique time of creativity with regard to business. Are you seeing that also?
Definitely. Yeah, I agree that you can. I love hybrid business model. That's fascinating. And I think you can create, we see all sorts of fascinating businesses, right? People who are, increasing water supplies in countries in which I'm trying to think, I can't remember the name of the company, but, we see all these interesting creative businesses emerging because with our technology, right? We can really do that. So I think the sky is the limit when it comes to create, creative business models and doing something that really excites you and helps you contribute.
Well, and I think for me, and I know so many people are like this, like I just get bored too easily. And I've said like these business models I have not been able to exhaust them yet. And that says a lot. Like, I mean, I came from the espionage arena, right? And even that at a certain point I left, because it was like, what do you do after, like, I got it, check the box, like, understand, I love the continual learning and growing and revamping. And to me right now, at least with how I look at business, it really is inexhaustible. And we can grow it and shape it and move it and evolve and spin off and do all kinds of fun stuff. For some folks that's really overwhelming. And I certainly have my moments of wah about how overwhelming the options can be. So it is kind of good to have guides. And so, what Claudette's talking about is like, read the book, kind of walk through the process, because it is nice to have some guidance on how to create that construct. Because otherwise, unlimited possibilities is fun to talk about, but it's challenging to live, right?
Exactly.
And so I like that you're putting framework to it, right? So make no mistake, folks, we can have both conversations. We can talk structurally, and we can also acknowledge that there's a lot of creativity and kind of potentiality in how we do it. That's the piece that you have to do, right? You get to say how you want your culture to be. But there are some guidelines of what makes for a good culture. What are some of the components you need to be looking at, and what are some of the aspects of it that you need to be thinking about? Is that a good summation of that process?
I would think, yeah, absolutely. I think it is. And I think within frameworks, there actually is a lot of creativity, as you were saying, because it's that whole idea of the dandelion growing through the crack in the sidewalk, right? With restraints, we actually sometimes are even more creative. I think that's a great summation.
Yeah, I was super resistant to that concept for a very long time because especially coming into arenas where, we're talking about the human experience, even in the business, it's an additional expression. It's like the macro representation of the human experience, so it's like how, the idea of like even stating that within frameworks and constructs that you do create more freedom. But I'll tell you folks, that is what we're seeing. And I know a lot of the light workers and visionaries and stuff for businesses, aren't real fond of constructs and aren't real fond of anything that might be perceived as limiting or rooted or even lower frequency or whatever the excuses that we come up with. But a lot of times it just comes down to basic discipline and the kind of the chop wood, carry water phase. And there are aspects of the business that you do have to attend to, whether it's your brilliance or not. Either you have to do it or you've got to bring somebody in to help guide that process. If you don't and you try to build, obviously we know what happens when you build on an unstable foundation.
Right, exactly.
Yeah. So Claudette, let's share a story with folks about let's talk about one of your wins and how, kind of how you helped an organization turn around this cultural conversation.
Yeah, happy to. So I was working with an organization, actually a department in an organization, and an energy company, actually. But one of the things that actually, I'm going to shift to a different example that's a little more related for the audience. Okay. So this is a school I worked with, and the private school, in more of a less traditional arena. I'm not saying what it is. Yeah, K through 12, okay. But I don't want to say anything revealing for their confidentiality.
Yes, protect your sources.
Always protect, right? Yes. So more of an alternative kind of school. And interestingly, I was brought in. I knew the executive director. They were having a lot of cultural issues and a lot of tension. So we did some different assessment work, and one of the things we found out is they had an underlying belief that all conflict was bad. And this by underlying belief, I mean in the collective culture or the collective consciousness. Yep. Right? But it was interesting is no one knew about that belief, which is often what happens. Of course. Right? So, but what we saw was this: all conflict was bad. And I remember we were in this meeting and someone said it. Oh my gosh, we have a belief that, and everyone stopped and realized that was the core of it. Because what was happening is, you can imagine, as they had so much tension leaking out everywhere, you could have cut it with a knife because they weren't addressing things directly. And as someone put it, who I'll never forget this because it was so insightful, she said, who was there, she's in the school, she said, we're so nice and kind that if you're not nice and kind, we're too nice and kind to tell you weren't nice and kind. And which is a great statement about them. And so, as is the case with most situations where the truth comes to light, they were able to then really move forward with understanding how effective discussion, passionate debate, right? Effective conflict resolution was really important for them to move forward. That it was actually literally stopping their growth and their ability to solve some incredibly important organizational problems. Because they were mired in this tension. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so we moved forward from there, in designing how they wanted to move forward and implementing that design. But it was really that moment of breakthrough that started the transformation.
Beautiful. Well, fantastic work, folks. This can be applied to your relationships, to your families. Like there really is no end to the value of kind of looking at what's at the heart of this. But I do think that oftentimes we don't use that same introspection with our businesses. And it's hard to see sometimes, right, when you're in the middle of it. And so relying on trusted advisors and mentors who can support that dialogue and kind of bring that forward is as important in your businesses as it is in the personal growth. We talk a lot about that in our superpower programs as we're helping people implement some of these processes into their existence. The same is true in your business, folks. And so really kind of sit back, maybe do an assessment of your business and see, because you can see the patterns and stuff start to emerge. Read Claudette's book and see what you can apply to your own growth and where you want to go with that. And I'd imagine you're going to uncover, just like the story she just shared, for some innate kind of beliefs that are in there that are wreaking havoc on where you want to go. And it explains why you're not seeing that projection change in the way that you'd like for it to. So I love everything you're doing, Claudette. You know, I appreciate the fact that you're helping organizations get clear about this, because we have some really amazing, brilliant people that, are doing amazing things, but they can only do it when their businesses are successful. And so I love what you're doing, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Let's remind folks again where they can go to find out more about you.
Oh, thanks so much. Great to be on the show. My website is culturalbrilliance.com. And has lots of information about culture. I have a great resource page with podcasts and articles and a complimentary cultural assessment guide. And the book is there, and the book is also on Amazon.
Beautiful, beautiful. And we will make sure those links are in the page, folks. So if you go to superpowerexperts.com with the show link, we will make sure to have that in there as well. Claudette, thank you so much. Any last little tips or points or thoughts you'd like to share with our listeners?
Oh, thank you. Yeah. I think this idea of being what I call a cultural detective, and I think I'm excited about this idea for solopreneurs and small business owners, because like you said, if paying even a little bit of attention to your culture and sometimes we get so in it, especially when it's our business, we stop seeing it clearly. So being that cultural detective, spending, a half hour a week for a few weeks, observing, noticing, and asking for feedback, you might come upon something that really transforms your business in an incredibly positive way.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, thank you again, Claudette. And thank you everyone for listening. As always, we appreciate your loyalty. And until next time, go out, uncover your superpowers, and change the world. Take care, everyone.
Are you ready to discover your superpowers? Go now to superpowerexperts.com and take the superpower quiz today.